time now for part 2 of the 1000 miles tour in GT4. And up to this point, this race has actually gone at a quite reasonable pace. So I reckon this is probably going to take me around, I would say 2.5 hours at the least to get this done. Even though I would say it's most likely going to be over 2 hours and 40 minutes. But either way, it's now time for part 2. I know I wouldn't ordinarily pit in for tyres, but because I'm pitting in for gas as well, you can probably understand why I'm doing both. So I basically do need a full tank. I probably could go to the end of lap 20 if I really wanted to, but I just wanted to be safe with my fuel numbers, just to make absolutely sure that I would get to the end. So I've got a full tank of fuel, a fresh set of slick tyres, and what that also means is I'm now pretty much guaranteed to get to the end on this load of fuel. So I am still 2 laps ahead of the Alfa Romeo Giulia Sprint. Then in third place, 3 laps down, is the Mini Marcos. Then behind him is the Honda S804, who is also 3 laps down. The Volkswagen Karmann Ghia, up to this point of the race, I think is now precisely 5 laps down. And the Fiat 500, who is at the very back of the field, is currently 6 laps down. And will most likely go more laps down before this is all said and done. Because, well, the Fiat is not really racing. He's basically just here to fill the field and basically get whatever prize money he can pick up for entering the race, basically. Oh yeah, this was also prior to a time where race teams practically did get entry fees for entering the races they ran. And aside from that, they also made sure that the teams were basically, of course, given money for entering the event by the event organisers. That's basically just the way it was before sponsorships came along and basically made the expenses of racing, in some cases, even more expensive than what they were. In other words, they basically bumped up the racing admission fees the drivers and teams had to pay. And that's kind of the way I think sponsorships have basically been ever since. Because the amount of money they were bringing in, even in the late 60s no less, when it was mostly tobacco logos and motor oil logos, and a few other bits and pieces as well, I might add. But mainly logos for tobacco and engineering products, if you will. A lot of race events did used to have entry fees, and if drivers and teams could pay those entry fees, then they would ultimately get paid for their troubles in terms of being able to, well, participate. I could be wrong with that analogy, but I do know there was definitely a time before sponsorships got involved where race drivers and the teams they were fielding with, they did used to have entry fees. I am pretty sure of that. As the Fiat 500 has now been overlapped for either the 6th or 7th time. I think it's probably 7 up to this point, but I could be wrong. Again, if anyone is actually keeping up to tabs with this race, the way it's going, and how many times I have basically lapped my competitors up to this point, I would definitely appreciate it if there was anyone out there who has been basically just keeping tabs on the entire race, just to see what's been going on, and also just how many times I have basically lapped my competitors. Pretty much every time I have turned a lap in this championship. But anyway, we still have another 15 laps to go after this one, as I am now less than 1 hour and 30 minutes into this race. So I reckon this is probably going to take me, I would say, at least another hour and 10 minutes to get through the rest of this race. But I do know that it was the involvement of company sponsorships that technically did give the race event organisers essentially more money to help host the events, as well as also paying, as well as also being able to give drivers money for paying the entry fees. And I think it was around the late 60s when the sponsorship boom really started in sporting events. Well, at least in racing events, that is, but I'm not sure if they were or weren't involved in other sports before then. And my speeds were a little slower down the Mulsanne that time around because, well, I have got a heavy fuel tank once again, and understandably my speeds would be slower. Because you know that heavier fuel normally leads to more drag. But at the same time, I needed this full load of fuel or else I would have basically run out. This was very much needed in order for me to continue pacing the field the way that I have. And that's quite something. So it'll probably be lap 28 when I make my final stop. Because that'll pretty much be when... Well, I could probably go up to lap 29 if I really wanted to, maybe even 30. If I was really feeling ballsy enough. But, I don't know. Anyways, I'm now overlapping the Alfa Romeo for the 3rd time in this race, as we head through the Porsche curves once again. I go up the inside, a little bit of contact there. I really had to get the elbows out to make sure that I would go through, and now the Alfa has spun. I had a feeling that contact was gonna probably spin him out. I'll admit, I was a little bit aggressive when I made that move, but I knew because I was just going to be held up otherwise, I basically needed to clear him. And there are times where the AI will just let you pass, but there are other times where the AI will basically just hold you up. And in that instance, I would have said it was 50-50. I mean, yeah, sure, I did technically spin the Alpha out, but at the same time, the Alfa Romeo, a lot like the rest of the field, was a lapped car. So under the normal circumstances, and if there were blue flag regulations in this game, then you would basically be telling the lapped car to get out the way. For me to go by. But it's fine, because in spite of the spin that the Alpha had, and he was probably going to have a spin anyway, because he wouldn't let me pass, I think we got away from that one relatively unscathed. But either way, it doesn't matter, because we sustained virtually no damage during the incident in question. So heading down the Mulsanne once again, and it looks as though up to this point, like, my domination is very much going to be untouchable at this point. As I am closing in on 900 miles driven, I don't think it's going to be too long before I do hit that. As I get through the hairpin once again, and it looks like at this point the race is pretty much going to be the same as it always has been. And yes, it was very necessary for me to fit the racing transmission, because otherwise I would have just been hitting the rev limiter all the time at somewhere between basically 140 and 150 miles an hour. That's basically what it would have been, as I run wide on the exit of Indianapolis corner. In other words, my miles per hour speed would be much slower than what it actually is. And this race, in general, would not have felt as fun to drive. I will say that now. But either way, that doesn't really matter, because I did everything I had to do, and I did it properly. Now I just have to continue turning laps over the rest of the field, as I so often do. As I now put the Honda S800, I think he's now going to go 4 laps down if I'm not mistaken. Really trying to see if I can get a clean pass on him. Don't want the same thing to happen to him what happened with the Alfa Romeo. He runs wide, that gives me room to go by, and I do that perfectly. As we now head through the Ford chicanes to end off what is lap 21. We only have precisely 14 laps to go. As I have been driving for 1 hour and 37 minutes, The Honda S800 makes his pit stop now. The rest of the field is pretty much as spread out as you might have guessed. So the Honda S800 is now 4 laps down. And I am closing in on, I think, the Fiat again. Is that who it is, or is it the Marcos? Oh, it's the Marcos. Okay. So closing in once again on the Mini Marcos, who is just up ahead of me. And he runs wide. And I go straight through with no real issues. And now we head down the long Mulsanne straight once again, waiting to lap our next car. And having a sip of water, it's unsurprisingly the Fiat that we overlap. So the Fiat, up to this point of the race, has now been overlapped, I think, 8 times. Because I have more or less overlapped him now, basically every 2 to 3 laps. I'm pretty sure that's now the 8th time I've overlapped the Fiat. And I don't think that's going to be the last time either. It's either the 7th or 8th time for sure. Which means the VW is probably going to be 7 laps down the next time I overlap the VW. Again, as I said before, because these cars are much older than the race cars of today, you really have got to get on the brakes earlier to make it through the corners with these things. That's basically just the way you have to do it. Otherwise, you'll basically see your car either in the Armco barrier or basically in the gravel trap. And those gravel traps you see, I think they used to be grass. So in other words, aside from the grass, you would basically have no other way of stopping. Unless you went headfirst into the wall. Which was very possible back in those days. And the thing is, with the whole so-called safety crusade that has been ongoing now for nearly the last 60 years in F1, if you can believe it, and just with racing in general, because of a certain Scotsman who nearly died on 2 occasions during the same day. The safety crusade very much marches on. Because it is not something that you can really take for granted anymore. Especially when you see some of the biggest accidents that you've probably seen over the last, well, I want to say decade now. It's amazing to think how far the safety of racing has really gone. And the fact that, while there have been some serious injuries involved with drivers, the drivers are at least ones who have survived their shunts, especially the serious ones, and they have technically lived to tell their stories. On how they survived what in the 60s, possibly also the 70s and early 80s, what would have been near unsurvivable impacts from the accident that they had. And yet with safety itself taking its most serious strides, especially by the early 90s in most cases. This was pretty much the point when racing became less about drivers getting killed and more of a case of drivers simply getting injured but at least surviving the shunts they had. There was also one time in F1 during the early 90s where they did actually ban refueling because it was the burning Ferrari of Gerhard Berger at Imola in 1989 where, according to Steve Ryder, when I was watching the race itself on Internet Archives, the fire itself was technically caused by allegedly a front wing failure as he went through the high-speed Tamburello corner, and then his car basically just came dead to a stop. And it basically just went up. But because safety improvements by the late 80s had helped Gerhard Berger to survive with only minor burns, I will say that I was impressed with the fact that the fire crews at Tamburello were just immediately on the scene, basically within seconds of the accident happening, and they actually did pull Gerhard Berger from his burning wreck basically less than a minute after it happened. So I think even then you could probably tell that they did make some strides towards improving the safety of not only the tracks and cars, but the drivers as well. Especially since Imola itself at that time, before the course was redesigned following the events of '94, at that place, they did still make strides in making sure that the cars themselves were made for accidents that were, at the very least, survivable. And while there were still a lot more safety implementations to be put in place, it was definitely a welcoming sight to see. That Gerhard Berger was immediately pulled from his car and was looking just fine. Even though he did have minor burns, obviously, and well, he did miss the following race, obviously because of the burns. But it is amazing to think that there wouldn't be another wrecked race car in flames, at least in F1's recorded history after that, for, well, at least another 30 years. Up until the Romain Grosjean crash, obviously, in Bahrain, that I think pretty much everyone knows about at this point. Or most people know about. But it definitely shows that we are very thankful with the improvements of safety in racing that really have gone a long way. And while there have been some huge accidents over the years, they have at least been survivable accidents. And that is what they were designed to be, under the circumstances. Can I get over 170? Damn it, I knew that was going to happen. Of all the cars I had to encounter, it just had to be the Fiat 500. I was honestly waiting for that to happen. Waiting for there to be at least one occasion where I was coming up on a lapped car too fast, and then suddenly it just happened to be the snail-paced Fiat 500 that was right in front of me. Also, I think he is now 8 laps down, from what I can recall. But yep, potentially trying to see if I could break 170, and then it just had to be that damned Fiat that basically ruined my lap. But you know what? It's fine. It was probably going to happen either way. There was no way I was going to keep going this fast, overlapping the Fiat, without clipping him at least once. It was going to happen either way. There was no getting around it. But I was honestly amazed to say that it didn't turn out to be a lot worse than it was. Although then again, whenever it does come to field fillers, that's always been a problem. When it comes to faster cars overlapping slower cars, they can, at times, cause the drivers behind them to make mistakes they wouldn't ordinarily make, because they were either on the racing line, or because the back marker in front of them simply didn't know the driver overlapping them was there. I'm pretty sure when it comes to lapped cars, sometimes they can be a problem, but other times they're basically just there to pick up whatever prize money they receive, and then they basically just leave. That's pretty much what field fillers do a lot of the time. So, yeah. 24 laps down, still another 11 to go, as my concentration right now has very much dipped. So we're less than 2 hours into this race. There have been mistakes and wrecks, as I would have thought there were going to be. But aside from those, we've been running pretty good. And I can certainly say that my pace has been pretty good as well, as we're now at 900 miles driven. So I reckon with about 10 to go, we're probably going to get at least another, I would say, another 90 miles at the least, if my calculations are correct. But either way, I figured this one was going to be one of the longer ones, but thankfully this time around we can just rely on speed to get us to the end. And that's what we're doing. So the Fiat 500 is now officially 8 laps down, and the VW Carmen Gear is now 6 laps down. And I think both the Mini Marcos and Honda S800 at this point are both 4 laps down. I was a little bit late there with that first downshift, or a little bit early I should say. But I think this will be the time where I do try and see if I can manage to gain some pace. Maybe see if I can manage to gain on that previous best lap time I set before. Maybe. But we'll wait and see. As we head through Indianapolis Corner for the 25th time of this race, and now through Arnage Corner once again. And up to this point, I would say my pace at the moment is pretty solid, which is what I want. So I think we're in good hands from here onwards to the end, is what me thinks. Oh god, oh crap, oh god, oh crap, okay. I really thought for sure that was going to be another slip to oblivion, but thankfully, however, that was not the case. So closing in on the Alfa Romeo once again, now putting him, I think, a 4th lap down. I really got loose there, but I somehow managed to put him a 4th lap down, in spite of me almost cutting the corner. Even though I did technically run wide, so it would have been a track limit offence in real life, but I don't think that really matters now. Because, well, track limit penalties, they don't exist in this game. So whilst I would have been given a track limits penalty in real life, it doesn't really matter in this game because, well, track limits, they practically don't exist. The only thing you're really doing, aside from making sure that your car stays on track, is making sure that your car is still running good. And I can certainly say at this time my car is running good. As I am coming up to overlap my next opponent, it'll probably be the Honda if it's anyone. As we are nearly at the 2-hour mark. And I reckon this is going to be the lap where we do hit 2 hours. I can say this race has really been a lot of fun. And I definitely feel like up to this point this is where things are really going to develop for me. As I'm slowly getting a slipstream from the Honda in front of me. And now passing him for the 5th time, or overlapping him for the 5th time I should say. I think that's right. Unless that's the 6th time I've overlapped him. Because I recently put the Alpha 4 laps down. No, I'm pretty sure he's 5 laps down, because the Honda is nearly a lap behind the Alpha anyway. And I think the Marcos is more or less the same as well. And the replay finishes recording before the 2-hour mark. Oh, fuck me. Okay. That could have been a lot worse than it actually was. I definitely feel like I've had at least a few death-defying encounters with either the grass or the gravel pits at this point. Wait, did I just say gravel pits? I meant gravel traps, not gravel pits. I have no idea why I said gravel pits. I really don't. That just completely bashed my brains out. That's basically what that did. I think I can probably go 10 laps on this set of tyres. So I think I'll take this set of boots up to the end of lap 29, and then for basically the final 6 laps, I'll run on the mediums. I think there should be enough durability for my mediums to get to the end. And this time braking for the Fiat, as I have now put him 8 laps down. Is that right? No wait, 9 laps down. Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, 9 laps down. As we're now at the 2-hour mark of the race, and I've gone too deep. But at least I managed to stop the car from spinning. So we're now at the 2-hour mark of this race, and we only have 8 laps to go. Sorry, 9 laps to go. I know how lap counters work. Excuse me. So under the Dunlop Bridge once again. Trying to make sure the car doesn't understeer too much. I knew that was going to happen. One moment where I knew the understeer was going to catch me out, that was the moment when it caught me out. And now this lap, a lot like my previous one, is ruined. But you know what? Because I have basically been trying to do this now for the last 5 days to basically just get in 1,000 miles driven, basically. I think at this point I just don't really care over how many more mistakes I make, because in terms of competition, this race, as well as this championship, competition-wise, it has almost stunk. And the only thing that's really preventing this from being I really cannot speak. And the only thing that's really prevented this championship from being totally stunk is the fact that we actually have a battle for third. However, I think that battle at this point has pretty much been resolved, from what I can see. So if you're asking me, aside from there being a tie for third heading into this last race, this championship in terms of competition, as I said before, it basically has stunk. And this, I think, is probably what the endurance events are most likely going to be as well. Especially the longer ones, where I am basically just going to be running lap after lap over the AI, and just continuing to do so until I basically finish the game. Because endurance events in this game are just so goddamn easy. As I have now overlapped the mini Marcos for the 6th time. And also trying to move back up on my chair slightly. But anyway, let's try and see if we can manage to get ourselves back in the fight. So, I think I'll run 2 more laps on this set of tyres, and then once I have decided that I have run 2 more laps on these tyres, that is when I will switch over to the mediums. Because I do want to make sure that I at least have enough grip to get to the end. I've got enough fuel to get there, but I also want to make sure that I put in enough longevity for my car to get to the end as well. And yes, I did cut those corners again, but there was nothing I could do about it because, well, my car was basically off the track in both instances. I couldn't really do anything to correct my mistake, I just let it happen and then regained control of my ride. At this point, it's basically just damage limitation. And there isn't really much else that can be said about it, aside from that. And that. But anyway, I feel like I can do 1 more lap on this stint. So then I've got the full 10 lap stint in my Jag, and then I can basically go for 6 more laps, basically just having fun in my Jag. So 2 hours and 6 minutes into the race, and also 44 minutes into the second half of this race, basically. As I take another sip of water from my cup. So if I can squeeze out 1 more lap in this car, then I think we should be good. So we're now at 2 hours and 7 minutes into this race. We still have another 7 laps to go. But I reckon as soon as we get to the end of lap 29, we can start running some sub 4 minute 30 laps, is what me thinks. I was not making that corner, even if I wanted to. That is something that will happen a lot when you have worn front tyres. You're going to be dealing with a lot of understeer, and not very much grip on the front tyres. Although, because I did a 10-lap stint initially, because I needed to pit to refuel my car, that was why I only made it an 8-lap stint, because I felt like I was going to run out on the next lap. And if that would have happened, then that would have been disastrous. Which is obviously what I don't want. So, I'll do one more lap on this stint, and then I will change tyres for probably the last time in this race. And as for refueling, well, that's not really needed, because I did top off the tank to make absolutely sure I was going to reach the end. And under the circumstances, I think I did a pretty good job of making sure that my fuel mileage was decent. Which is another important thing to have. When it comes to racing and refueling. That's basically just the vibe you have to flow with. And my left front tyre is basically gone. So nothing is really going to happen there, from what I can see. So 7 laps to go. This will be the lap where I pit in, as we are now 2 hours and 10 minutes into the final race of the 1000 miles tour. Which is representative, which is basically a representation of what the Mille Miglia used to be. Basically, that was a road race which was supposedly 1,000 miles in length, although I doubt it was actually 1,000 miles realistically. It was probably near enough to 1,000 miles. Which is a lot like what I think this championship is. But either way, the Mille Miglia basically was the closest, well, that aside from the Targa Florio, those were basically the two road races that were about the closest you could get to the Isle of Man in the car racing world. Even though the Isle of Man is still technically being run even today. And in spite of it being an event where either one or two riders who enter every year die, it is still a road race that goes on because of how important it is to the Isle of Man in general when it comes to their, well, basically their year-round events. A lot like how the Isle of Wight festival is so economically important to their economy because it's one of the UK's biggest music festivals. The Isle of Man likewise has got similar proportions of importance because of how many people across the world attend the Isle of Man each year. And although personally I have never really been a fan of the Isle of Man TT. I really can't deny that it practically is one of those very few remnants where you can see racing of a bygone era still being held basically once a year, where the only thing you really have with you for safety is basically your helmet and the bike you're essentially riding, and also somehow trying to stay up on without crashing or dying, basically. But I will say, for the riders that enter the Isle of Man, I understand the thrill of competing, but what I also come to understand is that you literally have got to have a screw loose in order to compete at the Isle of Man, because normally it's either 1 or 2 riders every year that die, and most of them are practically unknown riders, but you can definitely tell when the place itself has a high casualty list. Because almost every year in its history, since the event was first held in 1907, the list of fatalities at the Isle of Man, it basically reads almost like the list of fatalities either at Indianapolis or the Nürburgring. You would expect there to be high fatality rates at both those tracks, but at the Isle of Man, that's a totally different kettle of fish. And so here we are for our final stint of the race. We've switched over to the medium tyres. I don't think we're going to be short on fuel for the rest of this race. I think we should be fine from what I can see. The tyres may be cold for now, but they will warm up pretty quickly. We've got 6 laps left to run here. And considering what happened the last time, I tried to see if I could run 2 hot laps, well, one of them a hot lap, around the Nürburgring. I wasn't going to take the same chance of compromising durability for grip. I mean, even though I did beat my previous best lap time at the Nürburgring, I also noticed that I had a lot of tyre wear on the car by the time I got to the end of the lap. So that's why I switched over to the mediums, because, well, this time around, it's not really worth taking the chance, where you basically know the soft tyres are going to be chewed up and then spat out by the track surface. It's important to be mindful of these things if you can help it. And thankfully, that is what I am. I am very much mindful of these things when they happen. And I do whatever it takes to make sure I don't make the same mistake twice. Usually. Also, I'm pretty sure by the start of the next lap, or midway through the next lap, we are going to be past 950 miles. So I can definitely say we're going to be pretty close to 1,000 by the time we're done with this race, in terms of miles driven. So I think it's definitely near enough to us driving 1,000 miles. But at this point, the only thing I really care about is just getting this out of the way. Because then I can refocus my attention on getting through the next 2 Extreme Event Championships, giving me probably another 2 million credit bonus if possible. Or less than that. Well, more like a 1 million credit bonus at the least, probably. And then I can refocus my attention on the one-make events. Since that is partly what I more or less want to do once I am done with the next 2 championships. Because I really don't want to start the endurance events after basically just going balls to the wall with 3 straight races that went on from between basically 2.5 to 4 hours. I don't think I am ready for the endurance events just yet. And as much as I will get round to them eventually, I just have a few other things that I feel like I have to do first before I get there. And of course, there is the aforementioned one-make races, which will technically need to be done anyway. So, 5 laps to go here at Circuit de la Sarthe, and then once we are done here, we can then move on to I think I'll probably do the GT All-Stars next, in terms of the event I'll do. And we've now reached 950 miles driven. There's probably another 40 miles to go from what I can see. Or thereabouts. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see to be sure. Just budging my chair in, so in case if my back starts to creak, I won't have to hear it. I do also have my fleece around my neck again in case if my neck starts acting up, but hopefully it shouldn't. And I think we should be okay. And just taking one last gulp of my water. It was a pretty big one as well, but I did manage to swallow it, as you might have expected. But anyway, let's now go and get our balls to go as fast as they can go. So this is pretty much the time for me to go flat out for the rest of this race. And to basically just say that with this Jaguar, I am about to fly. Although if it was a Jaguar, then it would technically be leaping, but you get the point. I am basically a Jaguar with wings. And not Red Bull wings. That's the point I'm trying to get across. So through Arnage Corner, and now we head up the straightaway through Maison Blanche, and then we have got the Porsche curbs. So up to this point of the race, I lead by 4 laps over the Alfa Romeo. Then I am 6 laps clear of both the Mini Marcos and the Honda S800. I have now cleared the Fiat 500 for, I think, the 10th time now, if I'm not mistaken. Either 10th or 11th time, depending on distance. Give or take. And I have... So I've overlapped both the Mini Marcos and the Honda S800 precisely 6 times up to this point, and I have overlapped the VW Carmen Gear precisely 8 laps so far. And I was only less than 7/10 off beating my previous best time. So I reckon it's probably going to be about 2 hours and 40 minutes by the time we're done here, which is actually pretty reasonable timing, considering it took over 3 hours for me to finish at both the Nürburgring and at Monaco as well. So basically, I'm just going to be thankful. For the fact that I beat all of those. So now, we should be reaching 960 any time here, in terms of our mileage. Should happen any time now. If it hits it. And there it is. So we've now driven 960 miles. And this video has now been going for over an hour in the second half of this race. And so it looks as though from here, like, we are just going to continue to flat-foot the AI. So the Honda S800 is now 7 laps down, and I think it's only a matter of time before I do the same to the Marcos as well. We should have more than enough pace to get to the end of this race. You really have got to wrangle it to get it through the corners the way I do. At least that's probably the description I would have for cars prior to the invention of power steering. Because you have to remember, power steering didn't officially become a thing until the 80s. So under the circumstances, you basically were cranking the wheel as much as you could to get those corner entries you were looking for. And this was also at a time before active suspension was invented as well. Which is something else that I figured would be of notice. two of the very many innovations that came from Formula 1 and somehow found their way into the road car market. As I am recording this on what is now a Monday afternoon in late July, because it's gone past midday now at this point. And I would say we've pretty much got a bad fast car at this point. And I think there's probably, if it's not going to be a new best lap time, it'll certainly be close to a new best lap time the way I see things. As I am now up to 965 miles driven. And at this point, looks like this is going to be a new best lap time. It's a 4-minute 29.8. So 2 seconds up on my previous best lap time. So I'm now inside the 4-minute 30s. And I reckon I've probably got one more lap of pace before this is all said and done. So under the Dunlop Bridge we go for another time. We have only got 3 laps to go here at Le Mans. And then we can just basically get our money and our prize car. So the Alfa Romeo is just up ahead of me. And now he has gone 5 laps down to me. As both the Marcos and the Honda S800 at this point, if the Marcos isn't in front of me, then they will almost certainly be precisely 7 laps down by the time I get to the end of this lap. My speed is clearly that much faster than that of the AIs, so I reckon we're in a pretty good position here. Can I get a slipstream? Where is he? I think he's just up ahead of me, so it might just be possible, as long as I don't run into the back of him. And yep, that is the Marcos up ahead of me. I think I got a minor slipstream there, but nothing really speed breaking in all honesty. I did hit 170 at one point during this race, so I know that is possible with a slipstream, but it's not going to happen this time around. As I get on the brakes early, so my car gets through the corner. And we have still got another 20 miles of driving to go. So we're at 971 miles driven. So I reckon we've probably got another 20 miles in us, the way I see it. And this car is definitely going to be my most driven car for probably some time in this playthrough, until I get down to the longest endurance events of the game. That's really where it's going to be at. So this will probably be the last quick lap I have in this race. I figured I did have enough pace to get at least one more quick lap in the books if possible. I want to try and see if I can improve on my previous best. I think that might just be possible if I keep my car on track, then it should definitely be possible. And providing nothing catastrophic happens from here, I am pretty much home free. From the rest of the field here. From what I can see. I really want to try and see if I can improve on my previous best time whilst I'm at it. And I will make sure the lap is clean as well, because that's what I try and do most of the time. And I get it. I improve with a 4 minute 28.7. I think that's probably going to be the last quick lap that I run on this stint. Because right now, I need to make sure I get to the end of the race. Since I do have a low tank. I really want to try and make sure that I get to the end of this. So I think for these last 2 laps, I think I'm going to do some fuel saving. Or try to do some fuel saving. I do have the grippier tyres, so I think I should be fine. In terms of corner entries. But in terms of everything else, well, that remains to be seen. I did get the quick lap I wanted, so that's fine. Basically, I'm just going to short shift and see if that manages to help me save up enough fuel to get to the end of the race. Because I have a feeling the fuel is going to be down to 1 bar by the time we get midway through the final lap. I reckon that's probably what it's going to be, or just before then. As I've now overlapped the Fiat 500 for the 12th time, and I have overlapped the VW Carmen gear for what I think is now the 11th time of this race. So it looks like the Marcos is going to take 3rd in points over the VW, and it will be me that scores a clean sweep over the Alfa Romeo Giulia Sprint. As I would have expected, because I did it in a Jag. My Jag is probably going to be my most driven car for a while to come after this. Because most of the endurance races aren't even 1,000 miles long in length. They're more like anywhere from between 100 to 600 miles in length, or just over that. And, oh god, okay, it's alright, it's fine. We're staying on target. I did also manage to get my fastest lap, ironically, on target as well. So I'm just going to do some short shifting, just to see if that maybe does manage to save me some fuel. I'm not using as many revs, so I think I should be fine for the rest of this. I just want to make absolutely sure that I get my car to the end, because I think when we get to the cooldown lap, that will probably be when my car is out of gas. But I am convinced in saying that I will make it. And so here we are. So rounding up the 4 chicanes for the penultimate time here at Le Mans, and I should have just enough grip to get to the end of the race, as well as enough fuel. Right, final lap of the 1000 miles championship. I have driven 983 miles up to this point, so I reckon we're probably going to get around 991, maybe 992 miles as soon as we're done here. So it's not quite going to be 1,000 miles, but it's going to be near enough to 1,000 miles, is what me thinks. I will also need some water once we get on the Mulsanne, because my voice is dropping away again. Partly the reason why I'm going so slow, or going relatively low in terms of my revs, is because I need to make sure that I am saving fuel. And I think I have saved up enough fuel to basically run at my normal pace for the rest of this. Just taking one last sip of water before we reach the finish line, and at this point there is a very good possibility that says we are going to make it to the end. I figured it was worth it to try and save on the previous lap just so I would be absolutely certain of reaching the end. But considering I only had to make one fuel stop in this race compared to the previous race, that's actually not bad going. So I lead by 5 laps over the Alfa Romeo Giulia, 7 laps over both the Mini Marcos and the Honda S800. I then lead by, I think, 11 laps. No wait, sorry. I lead by 10 laps over the VW Carmen Gear, who I think is now, I believe, 2 laps ahead at least of the Fiat 500. So the VW is 10 laps down. No, let me rephrase that. So the VW is 10 laps down, and the Fiat, I think, is 12 laps down. I think that's right in terms of my calculations. Anyway, 989 miles driven, so I don't think we're going to hit 1,000 before the end of this, but we're definitely going to be gut-wrenchingly close to hitting 1,000 miles driven, and now we're down to our last bar of fuel. So this is where I think the fuel tank is going to get me to the end. We're down to our last bar, but I think we have just enough fuel to make it to the end, from what I can see. 990 miles now driven, as this side of the video has been going on for nearly an hour and 20 minutes. As I briefly look at my monitor. So through the final of the Porsche curves, and now onto the Ford straight, right before the Ford chicanes. On the brakes, and through our last pair of corners, and there we go. That is 1,000 miles done. Finally. And that race took me 2 hours and 42 minutes to finish, and no one else is going to make it to the line, because of how spread out they were. So I win in the end by 5 laps over the Alfa Romeo Giulia Sprint GTA 1600. So we've pretty much swept first and second place throughout this championship. The Mini Marcos will take home third over the VW Carmen Gear, who just basically had no pace in this race. Honda S800 takes 5th, and the Fiat 500 finishes 6th and last. And of course I turned off the replay music, as I said before, if you were paying attention. And we're gonna have less than 1 million credits from receiving that. Nice. And now it's time for the big money. 300 grand for winning the championship. And there we go. 900,000 credits is ours. And we're back up to less than 1.3 million credits. And so there we go. So I won in the end by 5 laps over the Alfa Romeo Giulia. Then it was 7 laps over both the Mini Marcos. And I forgot to save a replay from the previous race. Oh. Oh well. I'll have to think of something else that will be attainable to that. I will come up with something, I swear. It's just not going to be what you think it is. Anyway. In spite of me not saving the Monaco replay, probably because I was too tired to care at the time, that was the 1,000 Miles Championship. Oh, unless it's all the way down here. Yeah, I thought I saved a replay. I guess my PS2 must have reset its dates again for some reason. Yeah, I thought I saved a replay. I don't know, it's just a weird function it has. I really couldn't explain why. So then, the VW finished 5th, 10 laps behind me. And then I think the Fiat 500 finished last, precisely 12 laps behind me, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, those are your results. 40 points to me, 24 points to the Alfa, 14 points to the Marcos, 12 points to the Honda, 12 points to the VW, 10 points to the Honda S800, and 4 points to the Fiat. And for winning this, we get the Alfa Romeo Giulia Sprint Speciale. Nice. We get yet another Alfa Romeo for winning what was essentially an endurance championship. A challenging, long-distance sprint race that pits you against famous 1960s Japanese and American cars. Hey, guess what? It was mostly European cars in this one. But anyway, there we go. The European races are now done. And thank God for that. And now we can head over to the GT Auto and get our car washed. Because I want to. I want to make sure this thing is clean again. Because it's done a lot of hard work recently. As have I. But I figured I just wanted to treat my Jag with the respect it rightfully deserves. And that's why I did that. How's the oil looking? Sure, why not? I'll change it. I know it's only minor wear, but I figured just because I've been going at this now for a while, I might as well just give it a refresher. Of course, I know it normally takes 3,000 miles before the oil needs to be changed, or at least before the oil pump light turns red. But there we go. We have serviced our Jag. And now let's look at our stats. So 51.7% complete. So we gained another 0.8%. And we have now driven 2,700 miles in this game. And we gained 12 A-spec points, with 0.8% of progress in the game overall. So how long did I go in this thing? I went for 992.3 miles in the end. That's, to put it simply, yeah, that's a lot. And what's even more a lot is the car we just won. Which is this. The Alfa Romeo Giulia Sprint Speciale in Rosso Alpha. This thing, by the way, is red. If you haven't already figured that out. Anyway. Those are the displays of the Alpha. I'm obviously not going to sell it because, well, I make sure to keep a hold of my cars. And, in all honesty, I think this is a worthy prize car. Again, not exactly the best reward I've gotten, but I still think it's a worthy prize car for that event. In my opinion. I really do think it's a worthy entry. So, now I am going to save the game and think about what to do for my next championship, as I've decided we're doing the GT All-Stars next. So, next time on Gran Turismo 4, Extreme Events and Gran Turismo All-Stars.